Hey everyone, in this video I'd like to show you a few aspects of the country where I live, Chile. So we're going to browse through this photo book and I will comment the images for you. We're going to explore the country from north to south, and I would like to make you realize the great diversity of landscapes and weathers that exist in Chile. You probably know that Chile is located in the south of South America. Here it is, and the country has this very particular shape. It is much longer than it is wide, and in the west, the natural frontier with Argentina and Bolivia is the Andes Mountains. So let's get started with the more northern region of Chile, near the frontier with Peru and Bolivia. And this is an extremely arid part of the country, a desert of sand and rock. But as everywhere in Chile, the mountains are never really far, and as soon as you start rising a little bit, you find a colder and more suitable environment for life. So there is a bit of vegetation and many remains of the colonial period too in this region, with this kind of churches that were made of brick and mud. There are also countless volcanoes in Chile. We're going to see many of them in the book. And here that's a good example of these churches in a little mountain village. Also linked to the intense volcanic activity in the country, you have plenty of natural phenomena related to it, like geysers and hot springs that can be found especially in the north of Chile. And also in the northern third of Chile you find various salt pans. There are even more in Bolivia, which are like lakes where the water has evaporated because there are very little precipitations, leaving salt and various minerals. And when you are visiting them, I went to a few of them. They are intensely white under the sunlight. I really like the landscapes you find in this region of Chile. It looks like another planet already. Actually, it's in the Andes that various observatories have been installed, because due to the weather conditions, the sky is generally free of clouds and very clean from any pollution. We are very far from any big city or industrial center. So I think it's the European Space Agency or an European observatory that has been built in the mountains of Chile. Now if we go a little bit more south, we are arriving in a desert said to be the driest in the entire world. Several years sometimes dozens of years can pass without any rain. This is a salt surface. But once again, as soon as you start rising, you can find mountainous landscapes and an environment which is less hostile than the desert itself. But still, this remains an arid region, and there is very little vegetation. This part of Chile is also where many mineral resources can be found, and especially copper. I think we should see a picture of a copper mine a bit later. Chile produces about a third of all copper in the world, and this is by far the most important resource of the country. It gets exported in the entire world. There are more of these almost lunar types of landscapes. This is a place in the north of Chile still, called the Valley of the Moon. I went there. It is close a little touristic town or village called San Pedro de Atacama. There are geysers too. I had a bath in this pool. And surprisingly, even in this very dry environment where there is very little water, you find life. Little crabs and shrimps live in the water, which is extremely salty, and birds, a lot of pink flamingos, feed on them and live in groups in this region. Contrary to Peru, there are very little archaeological remains in Chile. The north of Chile was part of the Inca Empire, but they didn't leave cities or very impressive monuments like they did in other parts of South America. So now we are still descending, and we are reaching the new region called literally the Little North, as opposed to the Grand North we began with. And this region is becoming slightly less hostile and cold. Still, it looks a bit like the one we saw before. And this is where many of the largest copper mines in the world can be found. I visited one, which is an opened mine called Chuquicamata, the largest copper mine in the world. And this is really extremely impressive. And as in every region, a part of the region is in altitude, so you find snow. And the population is mainly living on the coast. These are houses, some of them very old. They were built in the 19th century, and they remain from the early development of mining in Chile. Now we're going to have a look at a very different part of the country, which is Easter Island. This is very far from the coast of Chile, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, saw it, I made a video specifically about Easter Island. I'll put a link in the description. And obviously it's a totally different kind of environment. So here are a few of the moais, these statues that can be found in Easter Island. There are very little trees left in Easter Island. One of the theories about the disappearance of the Easter Island civilization, or its decline before the arrival of Europeans, is that they were an ecologic disaster in the island. That remains a controversial theory, but the population and its culture would have declined due to the disappearance of trees that would have been over-exploited over the years. This is the center of Easter Island, which is a volcanic island, but the volcanoes are asleep, and there are lakes in their craters. So now we are reaching the part where the bulk of the Chilean population lives, in the middle of the country, a place called the Central Valley, which has a Mediterranean-like type of climate. This is the Cathedral of Santiago, the city where I live, and at the center there was always a square at the center of these Spanish colonial towns called the Plaza de Armas, and around you find the cathedral. Here it is again, the military barracks historically, and all the different faces of authority. This is a view of Santiago. And now we're going to the coast, not very far from Santiago, where there is another famous Chilean city, Valparaiso, which is a very particular place. The city is built around the bay, and the scenery is protected as a treasure of humanity. This was the first port where ships arrived before the Panama Canal was created, when they passed the Cape Horn at the south of South America. And still descending towards the south, we are arriving in a totally different region, the so-called lake region, or the lakes region, which has a much more wet type of weather. And actually here the landscapes could make you think about Switzerland, or even the English countryside, or Normandy in France, except that you always have the Andes on the horizon. And this region is centered on agriculture. A lot of fishermen too live there, and still many volcanoes. This one is maybe the most famous in Chile, the Osorno volcano. It's asleep right now. There is a lake at its foot, and various little towns, very typical, which are holiday destination in the summer, because it is less hot than in Santiago and the north of the country. This place was also colonized by many German colonists in the 19th century. So you still find a significant portion of the population in this region that speaks German at home. There are German schools. And it may be less exotic if you live in the US or in Europe, but that's an extremely pleasant region to go. Now still going south, we are arriving in an island, the island of Chiloé. We are approaching the southern horn of South America. I talked about Chiloé a little bit in a video about ghost ships. This is the typical wood cover of roofs and walls to protect them from the water. This is a very wet kind of region. And I talked about Chiloé in this video about ghost ships because there is a very specific folklore, legends in this part of Chile, and especially the legend of the Caleuche, a mythical ghost ship that would haunt the coasts of the island. This is in Castro, the biggest town in Chiloé, and you have houses on stilts that seem to be floating on the water when the tide is high, and then the water goes down and the stilts appear. There are plenty of these wood churches in Chiloé that were built in the 19th century, and the Cathedral of Castro is entirely made of wood. It's really magnificent. This part lives a lot from various sea-related activities, and in particular there are salmon farms. You see that the geography looks a bit like Norway in this part of South America. There are fjords everywhere, so even though there were historically no salmons in the south of Chile, they've been imported, and now Chile is the second biggest salmon producer in the world after Norway. And finally we are now arriving in Patagonia, the extreme south of South America, shared between Argentina and Chile. About half of Patagonia is in Chile, and this is a place of mountain, intense cold. We are now very far south of the equator. These are icebergs, rivers of ice in the mountains. And during the summer, when the temperature rises, there are landscapes with swamps appearing, plenty of water springs also, and Chile has countless rivers that are born in the Andes and go to the Pacific Ocean. Here there is very little population in this part of the country, mainly living from agriculture and a few hydrocarbon. This is near Puerto Aysén, one of the towns of the extreme south of Chile, and there is a famous, at least locally, natural park here called Torres del Paine, with these very distinctive peaks. This is a reserve for nature. This is really a magnificent place, and it's called Torres del Paine. Torres means towers in Spanish, especially for these very original kind of mountains that look like towers or teeth. They really look like a fantasy landscape. Here is another view of them with a lake at the bottom, and these towers again at another time of the day. And as we approach the extreme south and the Cape Horn, everything becomes covered in ice. Another incredible mountain landscape. Actually, before I lived in Chile and started to know the country a little better, I was wondering how a country could have such a strange shape. It is about 3,000 kilometers or almost 2,000 miles long, and only 150 kilometers, 100 miles wide. But finally, when you live here, you understand that the Andes are such a powerful natural frontier, that the desert in the north is so hostile and arid that nobody could really live here, so that at the end of the day, Chile is a bit like an island, even though it's part of South America. Okay, I hope you liked it, and I'll see you soon for another video. Bye bye.